Hello, hello, YouTube. This is Set Free from the Trap Ministry podcast, sharing biblical truth, sharing Jesus truth. Okay, I'm on here to talk about hip hop. I'm on here to talk about ghetto fables, and hip hop. I heard a very encouraging album that was full of testimonies. Okay, and I'm on here to share about ghetto fables. Ghetto fables in hip hop. All right, ghetto fables. How those in hip hop go in the studio booth and brag on criminal activity, and all this stuff that they're not doing, that they're bragging on, and how all these people start buying into it. So I'm here to talk about ghetto fables, ghetto fables in hip hop. Rappers are bragging about criminal activity, going in the studio booth, bragging about all this stuff that they're not doing, but everybody think they're doing it. So that's what this is about: ghetto fables in hip hop. Rappers bragging about criminal activity that they're not doing, but everybody think they're doing it. And this is what the Bible says about it. I'm in Proverbs 14:12. There's a way of life that looks harmless enough. There's a way of life that looks harmless. It leads straight to hell. Surely people appear to be having a good time. All the laughter, all the laughter will end in heartbreak and shift every word. So it seems harmless to go in the studio booth and brag about criminal activity on the microphone that you're not involved in. Okay? But it seems harmless. It seems harmless to go in the studio booth and rap about that and tell the whole world you live in illegal when you really not. Ghetto fables. And it's been going on in hip hop for a decade, way back in the 90s. Way back in the 90s. Same old stuff. Ain't nothing new. If some of the rappers in hip hop didn't cuss and say bad words, guess what? Nobody would have bought their stuff. Nobody would have bought them albums if they didn't say bad words in there. So ghetto fables, bragging on criminal activity, bragging on how many girls they slept with, bragging, and it seems harmless. It looks harmless. Then they push their poison out to the public, and the public start buying into it. Don't you know that people who are really living like that are locked down in the prison or on the run? Ain't nobody on no digital album or no CD. I don't know if they still got CDs, but ghetto fable. That's all hip hop is mostly about today. That's all it's mostly been about. Ghetto fables in hip hop, bragging about criminal activity or about your ice, about your chain, about how many girls you got, how many how many women you sleeping with, what you doing on the block, or what type of illegal stuff you doing. They ain't doing none of this stuff, but they got teenagers and they got young men. They got young men who think they're living this way and they're not. Once again, the people who are living that way are either locked up in prison or on the run. They're not in the studio booth. They're not. They're not. They're somewhere in the prison doing 35 to life. They locked down in the prison. They're not in the studio. They're not going on tour. There is a way of life that looks harmless. It looks harmless. It looks harmless. It looks harmless. But it said it leads straight to hell. Surely if people appear to be having a good time, all the laughter will end in heartbreak. It ends in heartbreak. Ghetto fables and rappers and hip hop bragging about criminal activity, that don't last. They come to an end. It leads to heartbreak. Now all these kids, all these people out in the world think you living that way and you're really not living illegal. But they said that just to get some money. That's called being a hypocrite. There's hypocrites all over. There's hypocrites in hip hop. There's hypocrites in hip hop. And then you're gonna try to go out and prove something, end up getting locked up forever. But if you pull all the cussing out, take all the bling bling in the jury and bragging on criminal activity, ain't nobody gonna buy it. Just pull all that out. They ain't gonna make no money. Cause that's all it's about. So it seemed like it's right. It seems right. It seemed like it's right. It seemed like it's right. The ghetto fables in hip hop to rap and brag about criminal activity. It seemed like it's right, but it leads to death. The guy in the studio booth that rapped about that, he is so blind to God's truth. He is blind to the truth of God. It says in 2 Corinthians 4 about the God of this age. We got some blind rappers out there and females too. They blind to God's truth. It's 2 Corinthians 4. It talks about the God of this age. The devil is called the God of this age. It says, even if the gospel is veiled, it is veiled from those that are perishing. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so they cannot see the light. The God of this age, the devil, is blinding people's mind. People are blind to God's truth up here in the mind. It's where the devil work at. And now the people who are listening to the ghetto fables, they blind to God's truth. They blind to God's truth. They're blind to the truth of God up here. They blind. They're blind to God's truth. Ghetto fables in hip hop. Rappers bragging about criminal activity. When the last time you seen somebody in the streets go on tour? People who are in the street life don't go on tour. They don't go in the studio booth. They're not in a studio booth. They don't do that. People who are locked down tight in the prison, they don't go on tour. Hip hop is about ghetto fables, bragging about the crimes you committed, how many women you slept with, and all these people buying into it. It's empty. It's empty. It's empty. The devil is blinding the mind no matter how much money you making. No matter how much money you making. It's empty. It's empty. Living that life is empty. And so many people that buy it, they're blind to God's truth. It's the blind leading the blind. The people that's riding down the street listening to it, they blind to God's truth too. This is Set Free from the Trap Ministry, sharing biblical truth. Real freedom is in Jesus Christ. Bye bye.